this is how things finished up at the end of turn 3 at, what am I playing? Birds of Prey. Birds of Prey, yes, by Ad Astra. This scenario is called Under the Clouds, set in Korea, 1953, with two American F-86 Sabres, these two planes here, Primo 1 and Primo 2, squaring off against two MiGs, North Korean MiGs, Sickle 5 and Sickle 6, these two aircraft over here. This is Sickle 5, Sickle 6, this is Primo 1, this is Primo 2. So yeah, we've got this kind of, you can't see it because we're kind of front on, but both these aircraft, the American Sabres cockpits are pointing this way. They're both banked over with their cockpits up this way, ready to turn in here, and this MiG has its cockpit pointing this way, ready to turn in here. So we're in this kind of strange 2v1 scissors kind of situation where he can turn in and he can turn in, he can turn in, they cross over and they do it again. And then we've got this the lead MiG who's pulled out of this pattern and has broken off over here, and so in a slightly strange position, but because everyone was having to do things plot simultaneously, yeah, the kind of coordination between these two broke down a little bit, whereas the two US planes stayed fairly well coordinated. So I'm doing I did all the spotting and all the fixing and stuff for turn 3 coming into turn 4, and interesting things that have happened. Primo 1, the lead American pilot, has got a fix on Sickle 6, so he's fixed him in this scissors pattern, so he has the initiative and the advantage, and that means that Sickle 6 has got to plot and move very early, so that's going to be bad. Sickle 5 over there is out, sort of not fixed by anyone, but not fixing anyone either. And the other thing was that this plane Primo 2, the US wingman, has had two goes at reacquiring Sickle 6 because he's lost visual on him and failed both times, and so has still not got a visual. So although Sickle 6 has been picked up by this lead US pilot, his wingman has completely lost sight of him and is actually focusing on that guy over there at the moment, but hasn't got a fix on him. He's just got a visual on him. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. So I've just plotted Primo 2, and now I'm going to plot and move this guy, because that's the next thing that has to happen before the other guys start plotting and moving. So yeah, this guy's at MiG's now at a serious disadvantage because he's got to reveal his hand before this guy even plots, and certainly before this guy moves. So this is turn 4. This is the moves done for turn 4 then in this air battle in Birds of Prey. These two Sabres trying to fend off two attacking MiGs. The two Sabres flying a very tight formation there in the centre, very close together, some altitude difference. He's at 128, he's at 145. And the two MiGs kind of split, this one heading that way south at an altitude of 137, and this one inverted, banked around, coming back towards the fight. He's separated out, got some separation, and is now turning back in towards the American fighters. He's at altitude 141 and at a speed of 360 knots. This MiG's 360 knots. The two American planes are at 355 and 340, 355 and 340 knots. What's kind of noticeable after this amount of time is that the American planes, the Sabres, are having a harder and harder time sustaining the turns and the energy required. The engine output at this altitude of the two Sabres is about 25 knots of speed per turn. So any manoeuvres or drag, natural drag, that reduces their speed past that, they can't regain apart from by losing altitude. The MiGs engines are much more efficient at this altitude and are producing about 50 knots of speed, about double what the Sabres are. So they are able to manoeuvre a lot more heavily and still retain some speed and altitude. And the other thing that's noticeable is that the lift being generated by these guys and the reduction in speed is now really cramping their ability to manoeuvre. If I come down onto this graph, your wing load, which is set by the scenario, that's, you know, how much work your wing's doing, I guess, and your effective speed, this is your knots effective airspeed, are plotted on this graph, and where it intersects you get your Q mark, and then you can use that to look at how much lift your wings will generate and therefore what your maximum G's that you can pull with manoeuvres that turn is. That's your maximum lift, and you cross it across this graph and you get your maximum G's. Now, with the one of the American planes, it's currently an altitude of 145 and its knots 340. I was just having a look at this one here for next turn, and that gives it an effective airspeed of about 220 knots, and that's taking into account because of the altitude, there's the much thinner atmosphere, and then and therefore less air going over the control surfaces, and therefore less ability to manoeuvre. So knots effective down here at 220 and a wing load of 40. When you look at the Sabre's maximum lift of 12, that's going to allow him to just about pull a 5G turn next turn. The MiGs are going quicker and able to sustain a quicker speed, and also have a maximum lift higher of 14. So even with the same Q mark, they'd probably be able to pull a 5.5 or 6G turn, but because they're also going to be able to go quicker, this mark's going to be further over here, and it's going to be further up there, and so the calculation is coming out somewhere up here around 6.5 Gs for them, and so they're just able to pull sharper turns because they can pull more Gs, and that is going to be a problem. So yeah, it's really interesting to see how you need to play some turns before the actual impact of the performance data of the aircraft really starts to become apparent at a given altitude. And no doubt if the Sabres dropped down to an altitude where their engines were more efficient, then that would be, you know, a really good plan for them, and actually maybe they should dive for the clouds. We're going to see what happens for a couple of turns, because they're still feeling as if they can double team up on this lone MiG and maybe get some shots into him if they're lucky. And if the initiative rolls work out well for them, they may have that MiG in trouble with this one going in the wrong direction. But they could also try dropping some altitude and trying to get to a situation where their engines performed better. Anyway, I've got I've got initiative rolls to do now, and then I've got to re-look at the bearings between all the planes and then make their sighting rolls to see who they've lost track of and who they've still got a tally on.
I'm kind of forgetting which turn I'm up to. I think this is the end of turn 4, but it might be the end of turn 5. No, I think it's 4. You can see the separation there. The plane, the aircraft way down on the left is Sickle 6, one of the MiGs, the MiG wingman, who is out of the action. At the moment, he greyed out last turn, couldn't pull as hard a turn as he wanted to, or didn't risk as hard a turn because he was greyed out and he didn't want a blackout. So he eased off on the stick. But even had he pulled his hardest turn, he would be well out of the action, which, as you can see, is happening over here, where the American Sabres, the 2 American planes, were trying to go 2 against 1 against the lead MiG and succeeding, as you can see. However, kind of messed up their manoeuvre. They were expecting the MiG to come around further, and they didn't have the right initiative, and they tried to pull into dives to reverse round behind it, and have actually pulled into dives and reverse round in front of it. And one slight curiosity of this system, although it is very good at illustrating and giving you information, it isn't a perfect visual representation, because this aircraft, the MiG on the right, is actually at height 130. His blocks tell you that, and this is at 122. This is at 140. So these heights are not representative, and this MiG should actually be up here because its nose is pointed directly at the lead US plane, and this guy should be way up here looking down on both of them. So but yeah, the lead American plane is right in front of the MiG's nose, and the MiG has got a fix on him, which means the lead MiG has all the initiative advantage, and this guy is going to have to plot and move before the MiG gets to act. The MiG is also going to get, because he's got a plane right in front of him at the start of the turn, he could declare an initial shot. It won't get resolved until the combat phase, and he'd have to stay pretty close on the tail of this Sabre, and it might not be possible, but he could declare an initial shot, and he's probably going to, because he might as well. This is going to be, you can see that he's rolled, and this guy's in a different plane to him, so that's going to make it very difficult, and the guy is virtually crossing his path at 90 degrees, and that's going to be the worst possible option. So the modifiers on this shot and the end positions probably make it useless. It's a very high deflection shot, but he may as well declare it because it's the first shooting we've had. So he's going to try and take all his advantages against Primo 1 here, and obviously Primo 2 has got to try and defend his leader. But has unfortunately missed his fix, and therefore is having to guess what the MiG might do. So that's where we are at the end of this turn 4. I'm going to say it's turn 4, and obviously Sickle 6 is trying to get back in the action. So the other little thing is that I've been doing some arts and crafts. I do like these little boxes; they're very cool. But I had some aircraft miniatures, and I thought, well, how do I do something with the aircraft miniatures, because that keep this kind of format, because it's very cool. And you see, a lot of aircraft minis games, they stick the aircraft on some great contraption of pincers and wire and aircraft, and car aerials and all kinds of stands, and the stands are, you end up with a feet of contraption for a 1-inch miniature, and it all looks very unwieldy and inelegant. So I decided to paint up a miniature and then cast it in some clear polyester resin, and you end up with something like that, which is pretty groovy. The casting's not perfect. The paintings are, a very amateurish job. These were some brooch. I used some a brooch mould that I found, which is a bit shallow. I've now found something a little bit larger for I think for either chocolates or soap bars. I'm not sure which, maybe either. So a silicon mould that will do a slightly bigger, deeper block. But there is an F86 Sabre in a clear polyester resin, which is quite cool. So I did two, like this scenario uses. I had 4 moulds, so I did two Sabres and 2 MIGs, and I'm not using them because they're still ever so slightly tacky, and they're sticking to the table and they're sticking to the flight stands. So I'm still going to let them cure just another 36 hours. Maybe I'll use them, maybe I won't. But you know, if we just take that out, and which way is he facing? Away from us. So there we go. We just end up with our MIG looking something like that, which is pretty groovy, isn't it? I mean, it's a detail, but you know, kind of fun. And I do like a bit of modelling and painting. I'm not massively into painting millions of miniatures, but every now and then it's nice to get a brush out, isn't it? So yeah, here we are with Birds of Prey, and continuing on, and let's see if anything comes of this clash over here in turn 5.
So I've got my alternative box miniatures on the board here. Cool. I'm quite enjoying this. I'm very much enjoying it, actually, but the little bit of minis project as well, I enjoyed. So we've got the 2 Sabres here. The clash with this MiG here didn't happen because as I suspected, the sort of relative speeds past each other were just too great for the MiG to get a shot off. And the fix that he had didn't really matter. I mean, it did mean that the lead Sabre had to move first and give him an indication of where he was going, but there was no way that he could follow it round. I mean, the turn was way, way, way too tight for him to even consider that. So this guy's now at height 111. His wingman back there, who's tracking him round very, very carefully, at 119. And these two have, you know, despite my best efforts, have managed to maintain fairly reasonable contact. You know, I think the wingman's doing a pretty decent job, as far as sort of my skill and knowledge levels are aware, of providing some backup for the lead fighter. So the Sabres are here, and the lead MiG decided with 2 against 1 that he wasn't going to do anything silly, and he was just going to extend back out this way and come and rejoin his wingman around there. So as we pan out, we've got this sort of situation with the Sabres banked round coming into this area, and this MiG banking round here to rejoin this guy. So this is the moves after, I think, 6 turns. I've still got to check some G effects, particularly on this lead Sabre who's pulled a 6G turn. He should be alright with that. And then we're going to have to do initiative rolls for next turn, and then sighting rolls to maintain visuals if that's required. And the other thing that's interesting, or could come into play now, is that at height 110 to 95, so between height 95, altitude 95 and altitude 110, there's scattered clouds. Now, this Sabre's at 111, like I say, his wingman's at 119. The 2, I think 119, no, he's at 129. Okay, so 111 and 129, quite a lot of separation between those guys. Okay, and the 2 Americans, two MiGs are very close together. They're at 119 and 122. But anyway, the lead Sabre could drop down into cloud cover, and that's going to start affecting people's abilities to spot. If everyone drops down into clouds, it's going to be harder to keep visuals on people. you're going to have to start maybe padlocking people in order to keep a tally fixed on them, rather than trusting to tallying them and maintaining sightings that way. So that padlocking is a sort of guaranteed tally, but it costs you on something that you've already got sight of, but it costs you two of your activity points rather than the one. So the poorer visibility again is going to suit the higher quality pilots, because they're the ones with more activity points who can therefore, afford the extra difficulty of maintaining visuals with the enemy, whereas poorer pilots are going to be struggling to get everything done with the fewer activity points, because this Russian wingman only has 5, and if he has to strain and spend some 2 to padlock and then loses someone and has to spend 2 to search and misses, he can lose track, and who knows what happens when he has to open fire on something. That's going to be all his points used up. So the cloud cover should make things is going to make things different, give us a different look on the combat over the next 5 turns or so. I'm not sure how long I'm going to run this for, just out of interest. The scenario book doesn't really give a game length indication. I think 10 turns seems reasonable. So I think another 4 after the end of this one, and we'll see where we're at.